Hello and welcome. I'm so grateful that you've tuned in today. My name is Alexandre, but everyone calls me Aimée, and welcome to the very first episode of our podcast, Paint and Chats. If you followed my work before, you know this is a space where we dive deep into the lives of extraordinary artists, unpack their stories, and most importantly, try to learn from their mistakes and triumphs to inspire our own creative journeys. Before we jump in, a quick note. During this episode, I'll be reading excerpts directly from historical journals and archive writings. There will be clips and audios from some of Emily's actual writings. Some terms used in these original quotes are completely outdated and offensive by today's standards. They are not something I use in my day-to-day and not something I would use unless it served a purpose, which in this case it does. So I included them strictly for historical accuracy and context. Let's dive into our first episode. Today we are talking about one of the most misunderstood, rebellious, and fascinating figures in Canadian art history, Emily Carr. So get comfortable, grab a cup of tea, maybe pull out a sketchbook or a canvas if you're creating alongside me today, and let's jump right into 1871. Emily Carr was born on December 13, 1871 in Victoria, British Columbia, on a day so cold and stormy that her father reportedly had to trek through feet of snow just to fetch the midwife. Growing up during the peak of Victorian decorum, Emily was a natural rebel from day one. Her parents, Richard Carr and Emily Saunders, were proud English immigrants who eventually settled to Victoria after following the California gold rush. They built a comfortable, prosperous life, but tragedy stalked the household. The family lost several infant boys over the years, leaving Emily raised alongside her sisters Edith, Clara, Elizabeth, and Alice, and one surviving frail brother, Richard Jr. Unlike her sisters, who embraced Victorian ladylike expectations, Emily was the apple of her father's eye as a child. She preferred walking the grounds, spending time with animals, and getting her hands dirty over proper domestic duties. And above all else, she wanted to draw. When Emily was just 15, her mother passed away, an event that completely shattered the family dynamic. Shortly after, her close bond with her father was destroyed forever by an incident Emily referred to in her journals as the brutal telling.
I couldn't forgive Father. I just couldn't. For spoiling all the loveliness of life with that bestial brutalness of explanation, filling me with horror instead of gently explaining the glorious beauty of reproduction, the holiness and joy of it.
Following this confrontation, Emily refused to speak to her father, creating a rift that never healed before his death in 1888. Her older sister Edith stepped into the stern, matriarchal role, driving Emily to seek escape the only way she knew how, through art school. At 18, Emily moved to San Francisco to study art. While she admitted she didn't take the formal institution overly serious, it gave her space away from her family's stifling home. When she returned to Victoria, her sisters expected her to drop what they called playing art and settle down. Instead, Emily began teaching art classes from the family home. Then came the summer of 1898, a pivotal turning point in her life. Emily traveled to Iqaluit on the west coast of Vancouver Island to visit her sister Elizabeth, who was working as a missionary. While her family hoped the trip would inspire Emily towards missionary work, Emily did the exact opposite. Instead of preaching, she listened. She formed deep friendships with the local Indigenous people and began documenting their lives through small watercolors and sketches. The community embraced her warmth and humor, giving her the Indigenous name of Kliwik, which translates to the Laughing One. Emily later reflected on this connection.
Houses and people were alike at Ucluelet. Wind, rain, forest, and sea had done the same to both. They were soaked through and through with sunshine. I found a man with sympathy and a sincerity I'd longed for. but had rarely achieved among my own people.
On her voyage home, Emily shared a quiet romance with the ship's purser, Mayo Patton. But despite their connection, Emily made a radical decision for a woman in the 1890s. She chose her artistic career over marriage. In an era where marriage meant surrendering independence and domestic submission, Emily chose art, a choice that was deeply taboo with her community and family. In 1899, Emily set off for London, England to further her studies, but the dense urban environment and rigid academics culture wore on her. She suffered a severe nervous breakdown and spent 18 months recovering in a sanatorium, where she filled a sketchbook she called Pause, which was filled with illustrations of her journey. When she finally returned home to Victoria after 5 long years abroad, she was fundamentally transformed. She completely stopped trying to conform to social expectations. She rode her horse cross-saddle, a spectacle that scandalized Victorian society, wore a bandana with a hairnet to keep the pain out of her face, and picked up political cartooning to pay her bills. By 1906, she moved to Vancouver to teach children's art classes in Paint and Stanley Park. It's during a trip up the coast towards Alaska, Emily observed the coastal First Nation villages and their magnificent totem poles, many of which were falling into despair due to the devastating impact of colonialism and forced displacement. Emily made it her mission to document these poles and villages in their original context through her paintings. Now, let's pause here, because this period of Emily Carr's work generates very necessary, important conversation today regarding cultural appropriation and the romanticization of First Nations communities. The reality is that history is complex. For generations, Indigenous creators were silenced, criminalized, or discriminated by settler society, while white artists who depicted Indigenous subjects were elevated. Emily Carr viewed herself as an archivist documenting a culture under threat. And while contemporary First Nations communities noted her respectful approach compared to other settlers of her era, she was still observing a struggle from the outside rather than living it. When studying art history, it's vital that we hold these truths together. We can appreciate her dedication while also recognizing that true allyship means uplifting Indigenous voices directly rather than speaking for them. Let's go back to our story. By 1910, feeling her technique was too literal, Emily traveled to Paris. There, she immersed herself in the post-impressionist movement, discovering bold colors and expressive rhythmic brushstrokes. She returned home and stopped painting what she saw, and began painting how she felt.
How tightly they sealed their secrets from me, humble and pleading before the great trees, awaiting the invitation from the spirit to come meet me halfway. Nothing is still now. Everything is alive. At last, I knew I must see through the eye of the totem itself, the mythic eye of the forest.
Despite producing over 200 vibrant canvases, the local art establishments rejected her bold new style. The provincial government refused to purchase her collection, leaving her financially broke and deeply discouraged. For nearly 15 years, Emily virtually stopped painting. She used her modest inheritance to build an apartment house in Victoria dubbed the House of All Sorts, where she scrapped by as a landlady, breeding Old English sheepdogs and keeping a sprawling menagerie of pets, including a famous pet monkey named Wu. She wrote during this dark period,
I've had to become cook and charwoman for the lot of them, and I loathed every minute of it. No, I was not nailed. I was screwed to the House of All Sorts. Twist by twist demanded that I forget that I ever wanted to be an artist, and buckle down to being a landlady.
Her revival came in 1927 at the age of 56, when she was invited to participate in the Canadian Westcoast Art Native and Modern exhibition at the National Gallery in Ottawa. There, she met Lauren Harris, a member of the Group of Seven. For the first time in her life, Emily found a community of peers who understood her vision. Harris became a lifelong mentor and friend, encouraging her to push forward. Inspired, Emily bought a small wooden caravan trailer she named the Elephant and towed it into the deep rainforest of British Columbia to paint amidst the giant cedar swirling skies and the deep wilderness. In her 60s, as her physical health began to fail, Emily turned increasingly to writing. Her autobiographical stories, published under her childhood name Kliwik in 1941, won the Governor General's Award and brought her nationwide acclaim on CBC Radio. Interestingly, Emily was an outspoken critic of missionary attitudes and the residential school system of her area, though many of those critiques were notoriously edited out by publishers at the time to avoid public backlash. Emily Carr passed away on March 2, 1945, at the age of 73. In a controversial postscript to her life, Harris, acting as the executor of her estate, divided her remaining body of work into 3 categories: pieces to be sold for scholarships, and a final category of works he deemed minor or unrepresentative, which were intentionally destroyed. It leaves us with a lingering question: how much of an artist's authentic history gets lost when others decide what is worthy of being saved? Looking back at Emily Carr's life, she wasn't just a pioneer of Canadian landscape art. She was a fiercely independent woman who refused to let societal expectations dictate her path, even when it meant decades of isolation. I hope Emily's story reminds you to honor your own authentic voice in whatever you create, even when the world around you isn't ready for it yet. And that's the end of our episode. Thank you so much for joining me for this very first episode of Paint and Chats. If you enjoyed our time together, please make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a fellow art lover. Until next time, stay creative, stay curious, and please be easy on yourself. Bye.